Hey everyone, it's Drew Kreisman here, and I want to come on and have a quick conversation, well, we'll see how quick I can be, about the state of Final Fantasy, as it were. Really with regards to Final Fantasy 16 and 7 Rebirth, but this is going to be a non-spoiler conversation, though I will be talking a little bit about tone and gameplay styles and some of like the storytelling styles. So if you're still trying to go in totally cold on either of those games, I just wanted to let you know up front. I have also not yet completed Rebirth. I'll be doing some kind of content. I haven't totally figured out what yet. Probably just a Q&A, honestly, once I'm done with the game. And I want to give enough time for other people to be done with it. I'll throw out, just ask me your questions as a kind of way of organizing my thoughts on it. I have a billion thoughts going in a billion directions on Rebirth. Of course, my main takeaway is that I absolutely love it. And the conversation that I wanted to have now was more a reaction to a lot of the comparisons that we see. Now, anybody who's followed me for a while or even just reads a handful of my tweets from the FF Weekly Pod account knows that I'm very much against pitting not just these two Final Fantasy games against each other, but pitting Final Fantasy games against each other in general. I think there is a qualitative difference between comparison, which can sometimes be very helpful toward understanding, here's how this one works, here's how that one works, and even saying, I prefer this to that. But I have long balked at the idea that there is a correct way to do Final Fantasy, or that because some people prefer one way of doing it to the other. For example, one of the big ways that you might think of this is when it's more fantasy oriented versus when it's more sci-fi, when it's more medieval versus when it's more modern. People have their preferences on those things, but I am not of the belief that one is inherently better than the other. And obviously Final Fantasy isn't of that belief either. So for me, it's always a bit silly when someone, and I saw an editor at IGN do this recently, right, and I commented on this on Twitter, try to suggest that you have to pick one or the other. Because to me, and not particularly with that her comment was more on gameplay styles and about how 7 Rebirth essentially is this kind of huge open world. It's full of mini games. It allows you to interact with it. It's basically got all of the modern game things where gaming has been going. And it makes, in my opinion, incredible use of almost all of them. It masters them in a way, and it presents them with all of the Final Fantasy VII flair, and that is one of its major strengths. I said this recently as well. It's kind of a throwback to the way early Final Fantasies really were just mashing together, like, let's take some Dungeons and Dragons and some Dragon Quest, a little bit of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, and kind of mash it all together. And it wasn't for a while that they started inventing some of their more original ideas, like Moogles and Chocobos, right? Those early games still had like elves and vampires and your standard fantasy fare. But what's made the series what it is over the years is that it can be all of these things. It's that meme of the little girl going, why not both, right? That's what Final Fantasy is. And so our working premise today, because I think everybody agrees with that, not everybody out there, obviously, I think most of the people listening to this are likely to agree, even if they have a strong preference for either, say, Rebirth or 16, I think most people listening to this would think it's a good thing that both exist, right? And so rather than rehashing all of that, or doing it any more than I already have just now, our working premise for today is going to be this. I believe, even without having quite yet concluded Rebirth, and so I do have the right to come back to this afterward, but I believe that Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, back to back, is the new greatest achievement in the history of Final Fantasy. Those of you who listened to the episodes where my brother and I discussed the original Final Fantasy VII, when we were doing our big wrap-up, I talked about how my new favorite thing to do to skirt the question of like what is the greatest Final Fantasy of all time, which I'm now counting down my favorites anyway on TikTok and YouTube and stuff. But I think what's more interesting than picking one favorite Final Fantasy for me is to look back at that moment in time where Final Fantasies 6 and 7 were, as you know how numbers work, back to back, right? You may be like, well, yes, true. Again, that is how numbers work. But when you really dive into what those games are, it feels like in so many creative decisions, whenever Final Fantasy VI went one way, a straightforward story without too many plot twists and nothing that really messes with the viewer or the player, right? Final Fantasy VII goes in the complete polar opposite direction. A zillion plot twists, everything is weird, we don't know what the heck is going on, right? Constant confusion, but that's part of the fun. Final Fantasy VI being a little bit more medieval, certainly the steampunk aspect, right? So Final Fantasy VII much more modern. And on down the line, there are so many creative decisions where they just did the opposite thing. Even getting to, right, the one being on the Super Nintendo and kind of being this great achievement of the final era of 2D gaming. And then all of the Nintendo stuff that comes with, and there's a tonality that came with being on the Nintendo in those early days. And now you have this PlayStation thing, so we can swear, and we're going to do a lot more anime stuff, and everything's going to be big, everyone's sword's going to be big, and there's going to be a guy with a gun on his arm, right? Like, it just, tonally, very different. And yet, most people, good and honorable and honest people, know that both of those games are masterpieces. But they're very different from each other. And a lot of people to this day do have a strong preference for one over the other. But to me, I have always believed that a group of creative people being able to make, under the umbrella of the same thing, Final Fantasy, right, can make two things that are so different, and yet they do have a bond. They do have a shared DNA. And because of the way that video game development has changed over the years and how long it can take to make games, I wasn't sure we would ever see anything like that, where you have two games that release, within even a couple of years of each other, that are both in the same franchise and very different from each other, but masterpieces, and friends, they've done it again. They have absolutely done it again, and it is my belief that because of the importance of presentation to Final Fantasy, and okay, quick side rant on presentation, right? Because it's funny to me that in video games we use one word to describe the jobs of like several hundred people who end up making the video games, right? In the Oscars, right? In film, presentation is what most of the awards are. There are a bunch of different categories of things, right? There's costumes, and there's hair, and there's makeup, and there's sound, and there's cinematography, and acting is presentation, architectural set design is presentation, right? And now, those of you who know me also know that I think the story of Final Fantasy XVI was absolutely phenomenal, totally stellar. But of course, there's a lot of subjectivity in that. Not that there isn't subjectivity in this, but one thing most people seem to agree on is that the acting and the writing and the music and the costumes of Final Fantasy XVI, as I was talking about earlier, the set design, the architecture, is incredible. And for me, it was Hironobu Sakaguchi who said originally about the creation of the series, he said, "I don't think I'm a great action guy. I think what I know how to do better is to tell a story." We all know that these games are first and foremost about their stories, and presentation is a massive part of that. And to me, Final Fantasy XVI has the greatest presentation in the history of Final Fantasy by a lot. All of those things together, like the storytellers, the story makers, the craft of it is incredible. Rebirth, the craft of it is also incredible. The voice acting is phenomenal. The soundtrack might be the greatest soundtrack in the history of soundtracks that ever soundtracked. It's remarkable. I was fawning over the design of the open world earlier, and I don't even like open world stuff. Not even in Horizon that much did I like it, and Horizon takes place where I live, right? So I'm blown away by the quality of the craft and of the presentation. And I think that both of these games have lifted their stories and their themes and everything that Final Fantasy is about to newer and grander heights than we've ever seen before because of the quality of the presentation, if we must wrap it all up with one word. But again, what I actually end up coming back to now over and over again is how genius it was for them to design 16 the way it was, knowing that Rebirth was on the horizon. Right? You want to play a bunch of mini games, you want a big explorable open world, you're gonna get your Final Fantasy. And it's gonna be the openiest of open worlds, and it is gonna have a lot of mini games. Right? It's like Neo in the Matrix. I need mini games. Lots of mini games. Right? You can get lost, and boy have I, for hours just wandering around in that world. 16 is much more of a throwback to the kind of linear style games. 13 and 10, but even before that, the more, on the Nintendo era type of games. Also with its tone. And then you've got tonal differences, right? I've seen some people saying this, people who love Rebirth but not 16, saying, see, this is proof that you have to have humor in your Final Fantasy because everyone loves this one more because it's funny and 16 wasn't funny. First of all, yes, it was. I sent a tweet about that actually with several characters in it that did very well. Like 16 has a completely different style of humor than 7. But both of them, yes, this is the central point. I'm going to keep hitting it over and over again on every single topic because it's blowing my mind that they've done this again. Where the version of a joke in Final Fantasy 16 is going to be much darker, clever. It's going to be thrown away, or maybe even whispered or implied, right? Whereas the humor in Final Fantasy 7 always has been Cloud riding a dolphin, and any number of and the team punching each other in the arm and making fun of each other and those kinds of hijinks. We get both. Isn't it great that we get both? That's what I think. The Game of Thrones thing or whatever. But I love it when Final Fantasy gets to do that, and 16 wasn't the first time. Tactics did it. Type 0 did it. Right? Others are. Again, whether it's medieval or fantasy, darker, lighter, a little bit more kid-friendly, a little more geared toward adults, a little more linear, a little more open world. The beauty of Final Fantasy, where so many other franchises do put themselves in a box, do kind of typecast themselves, have a list of things you absolutely have to be in order to be Halo or Call of Duty or Mario or basically all the Nintendo franchises, right? That's the great thing about Final Fantasy, is that you can change it up so entirely that you can, within a year, within one trip around the sun from each other, offer these two very different experiences. I'm sure some people will suggest that because I'm going to end up putting in over 100 hours into Rebirth, finished Final Fantasy 16 in 50? Like in a quick 52. Ira was over. We powered through it, right? We beat that game in like 4 or 5 days. I'm going to be playing Remake for weeks, right? Or Rebirth, excuse me. So does that mean that Rebirth is better? No. In the same way that watching a film is not inherently better than watching a television show. It really depends on the type of experience that you're going for, and it does always bring me back to that central point of judging these things for what they're actually trying to be and letting them be what they are. Now, you can still critique inside of that. Hey, you were going for X and you didn't quite nail it. But this is why, especially with Final Fantasy, I just completely reject the, it shouldn't have made that decision analysis, right? It shouldn't be action. It should be turn-based. It shouldn't be mature. It should be goofy. It shouldn't be dark, it should be light. Like, no. It should be whatever it wants to be. It just has to do that well. And man, am I blown away by the quality of the last 2 Final Fantasies that I've played. I don't like to belabor the point, and I know there are some people who are hardcore supporters of mine who hate it when I come back to this. But while I defend games like 13 and 15, never played 11, 12 has had a weird renaissance, I still do think of that general era as a kind of awkward teen phase for the franchise, right? It went through some weird changes, and I think a lot of them for the better. I've often said, and I wholeheartedly believe, that those games took a hit that was almost inevitable when Hironobu Sakaguchi walked away. There were going to be changes, and some people weren't going to like them. That's what happens with change. Some people don't like it. But they established some really incredible things that have stood the test of time. Those games have found their audience, and their DNA from games like 13 and 15, and certainly 11 and 14 kind of have their own thing, right? Are in these modern masterpieces in my mind, because I don't think that those games were masterpieces, and it's weird that it was something we came to expect from the series, because in my mind 6 through 10 basically all are. There's a debate over 8, but the rest of them I think just are masterpieces. And so when we went through 11 to 15, with 14 being a possible exception in there, I understand all that, even though I defend them or whatever. But these two games, to put it as simply as I can, have made me feel like I did when I was a kid again. But it's different. It's not the same, but there is that just general wonderment, that magic, that just... I know I preach a lot against cynicism. I know, I'm sure at times dealing with me publicly feels like, this guy, how does he manage to be optimistic about everything all the time? I don't. I really, really don't. A lot of, especially my public bouts against cynicism, have to do with me knowing how easy it is to fall into that trap and be negative about everything. There's so much awfulness in the world, and because we live in the modern era, we're bombarded by it every single day. I don't know that the human soul was quite built for that. And one of the reasons why I do get so defensive about art is because I believe it is a place where people can drop some of those things for a moment. A great piece of art can melt your cynicism away. Now, for some people, obviously they're so committed to the cynicism game, I think they've fallen down that rabbit hole, right? But I think for a lot of, even just, I hate to use this word, but I think you'll know what I mean, just normal people out there experiencing the everyday stresses of life, and it's brutal, man. But if you listen to a really good song, or watch a really good movie, or those of you listening to this, play a video game that really makes you feel something, that's powerful, that's meaningful. And every Final Fantasy game, even the ones that I was just talking about a minute ago that I don't consider masterpieces, they've all done that. But 16 and 7 Rebirth have been that from second one till now. A full body experience of what all Final Fantasy can be. It is, to me, the greatest proof we've ever gotten that this series can be everything, can be anything, but it always has that same heart that makes it Final Fantasy. And I've never been more, honestly, proud to be a Final Fantasy fan. Sounds weird, but it's just how I feel right now. So, yeah, weird way to end, but I'm gonna end it there. So, thank you all for listening in. If this was your first time, maybe consider subscribing for $1 a month, listening to all the podcasts my brother and I have done, going through Final Fantasies 1 through 7 plus Tactics, and we're almost at the very end of Final Fantasy VIII. I think I'm editing one episode right now, and then I think we'll have probably 3 or 4 more episodes on the plot of 8, but then we have to discuss the music. Like, it's ridiculous. We do a lot of talking about Final Fantasy around here, and we appreciate any and all the help and support. But thank you all for listening in. I hope you'll continue to be absolutely awesome out there. I will continue to be absolutely Drew Kreisman in here. And until next time, I'll see you out there in the world.